Hi there, my name is Mr. Layman. Welcome to Social Studies. Today we're going to be talking about what on earth social studies is. We're also going to be talking about secondary sources and primary sources. These are primarily designed for my ancient history class, but if you're just studying social studies or history and want to learn some more, great, you're in the right spot. So, without further ado, let's jump in. All right, let's not waste any time. This is 6.1a, Mr. Layman's Homeschool History. What is social studies anyway? So, if you're taking this class, you're probably in some sort of history or social studies class, and you're wondering, well, what on earth is the difference between history and social studies? And they're often kind of confused for one another, but they're quite different. Social studies is divided into four main subject areas, including history. So, history is inside of a larger concept we would call social studies. All four of these can help paint a picture of how people live, how people used to live, or how people might live in the future. The four major subjects that make up social studies are history, archaeology, geography, and culture. Or if I was doing, there we go. Can't really see it if my hand is completely turned. So, anyway, the four major subjects are history, archaeology, geography, and culture. And today I'm going to be talking about all four of those. These four categories form what we call sociology, which is the scientific term for social studies. So, if you're in a social studies class, I guess you're technically in a sociology class. But those two words are the same thing. Social studies, sociology, they're in the same discipline. History is a written record of human events. Written material goes into this category. So anything that's written down is classified as history. But as humans have been evolving their technology, things like video clips, audio recordings, this recording right now are also something that could be written because you could have closed captions on this and just have my voice, be typed out on the bottom. Since that could be written, those are also classified as history. Examples of history include things like journals and diaries. Those are probably the most common. Books, films with people talking in them. These notes we're taking right now, all of these things would fit into history. Normally, when I teach this, students go, oh, something like a diary, like the diary of Anne Frank would be classified as history. Yes, that's something historical. So as long as it's written down, it's history. Events that predate human activity or the writing of those human events are often called prehistory or prehistoric, as they exist before there was writing. These cave drawings over here in France predate writing, but some pre Columbian cultures lack writing, and their prehistory can exist into the 18th and 19th centuries. There were definitely tribes of people even not even discovered 30 years ago that just lived in the South American rainforest that just didn't develop writing. So we don't have written history of them. You could have something like an oral tradition that's passed down. You could tell people stories, but unless you're writing it down, it's not really classified as history. Those would be more something like an oral history. The next thing studied in social studies is archaeology, which is the study of evidence or artifacts, objects left behind by people. This is an archaeological dig where artifacts, which are objects made by humans, are collected and cataloged. It gives us a sort of snapshot of the past. Examples of archaeology or artifacts could include things like weapons and armor, mummies, houses are considered artifacts because they're made by people, cars, bones, books, all that stuff. In this picture you're seeing over here, this is an archaeological grid. When you dig in an archaeological site, you make these squares everywhere. So you catalog where things are. So that's why those squares are there. It's to figure out, oh, where were all these artifacts? So you're sort of looking at it like a grid. So you can see where stuff was at that little snapshot in the past. There are many methods to find the age of an artifact. You can look at physical evidence of an object. If a coin has a date on it, that can help. But if I find a bunch of objects together, I can make a reasonable guess as to how old they are. I don't necessarily need a date on them. It doesn't always have to be like a coin or like you looking at the back of a DVD and it'll have the date on the bottom. But if I find objects made of plastic, I'll go, okay, plastic is a relatively recent invention. They didn't have plastic 100 years ago. So I can make a reasonable determination about how old something is. You can also look at, when you're doing a grid, like in that picture right there, you can also look at the depth of the object. So if it's deeper, it's usually older. If you find a deeper object in the earth, it's usually older because it's been covered up by things like sediment and dust. And if you go to cities in Europe, half the time they'll just build on top of other versions of the city. So if you go into basements in Europe, you'll be walking around on what was the surface streets. Archaeologists also use radiocarbon dating, often called carbon-14 dating, to test the amount of carbon-14 there is in an object to determine its age. Carbon-14 is a radioactive isotope that exists in living things have carbon-14 in them. And that decay rate is constant. So every 5,000 years or so, the amount of carbon-14 in something decreases by half. So we can use math to determine how old certain objects are by testing to see how much carbon-14 is in those objects. It's expensive and it's time consuming, and you might not want to do that with every single historical object you find. But if I find something like a sword, I might want to do some carbon-14 testing on it. But if I find something like an Xbox game, I'm probably not going to do a bunch of carbon-14 testing on it. Another area of study in social studies is geography, which is the study of where people lived or where they live right now, and how their physical location shapes their lives. There is like a loud person in the hallway outside of my apartment. Should I just leave it in? Is it funnier? Can you hear it? Oh, well, we'll find it later. Anyway, according to National Geographic, geography is the study of places and the relationships between people and their environments. Pictured here is an environment with is that a caribou in there? Neat. Examples of geography can include things like mountains and rivers, roads, forests, a herd of sheep, iron or gold in the earth. All that stuff's in an environment. Whatever is in your area is your environment. This could include something like, if I'm in Los Angeles, it could include something like pollution. It could include something like traffic. It could include something like having a lot of people in it. So wherever you're living is what your geography is. And it's going to be just a collection of whatever landforms or resources are in that area. Geography can also tell us about a location in terms of those landforms and resources. Resources refer to anything that humans use in a geographical space. This could be something like iron or coal, trees, or even something like fish. Landforms are the physical shape of the land, but this can also include lakes and rivers. I mean, honestly, a lake is basically just a very large puddle. So if you go down into the ocean deep enough, you will hit more land. So a lake or a river or a stream, those are all still landforms. They are impacting how you live, and the shape of the land is creating that effect. So every physical thing on a map is a landform. We're going to discuss resources in the next section, but I just wanted to make it clear for now that geography is a study of landforms and how that geography, or how those landforms and how those resources impact the people living in those areas. The fourth thing studied in social studies is culture. A culture is a way of life for a people. Not all people have the same culture, so we don't say culture is, oh, just how people live. It's how certain kinds of people live. Here's a question for you. What meal of the day is the person in that picture having? Let's take a guess. I'll wait for 5 seconds. Okay, you've probably guessed breakfast. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why you might guess breakfast. Well, the person's eating cereal. Maybe you would say, I can see they have, it's daytime. So, okay, I'm imagining they're probably not eating at night. So you eat dinner at night and you eat cereal in the morning. So you might reasonably conclude from our culture that this person is enjoying breakfast. If this was taking place in Southeast Asia, the cereal is not that common for breakfast. They will have like meat and beans and rice and things. Like they'll have more of a dinner-ish meal for breakfast. If this was in France, that person would have coffee and a croissant. They would probably not have, what is that, berries on some Cheerios, whatever they're eating. They would probably not eat that. Those different cultures enjoy different kinds of food at different times of the day. I'm from a state, Maryland, where this is a local summertime treat. It's a peppermint stick jammed in a lemon. That's the whole recipe. It's not even, there's not even sugar on the lemon. It's just pepper stick jammed in a lemon. But it's not out here in Los Angeles where I live right now. Cuisine is an aspect of culture. It's part of how people live, and it's unique to where they live or what kind of resources they have, which again kind of fits back into this whole idea of social studies, where someone's resources, like if you live in a place that has a lot of lemons, you're probably going to have this lemon treat more. But it changes depending on where you are, how you grew up, what the customs of the people in an area are. I picked this lemon peppermint stick thing because it's unique to where I lived. Now, here's what I want you to do. You write something that's a food that you enjoy that maybe doesn't exist in other places. Maybe it's a food that maybe you only enjoy in your home. Maybe it's a home cooked meal that only your family makes. A good example of this pattern in Western culture is something I like to call the pattern of three. You have Goldilocks and the How Many Bears. You have the Little Pigs. You have the Billy Goat's Gruff. This is usually showing my age. Kids, a lot of times these days, they have no idea what the Billy Goat's Gruff story is with the trip trapping over the bridge. The kids are like, I don't know what that is. But in either case, you can infer from this pattern that it's the three bears, it's the three little pigs, and it's the three Billy Goats Gruff. So those are examples of that sort of pattern in Western culture. But other examples of culture can get into things like music, dances, jokes, fashion, accents, language, art. Those are all forms of culture. This is also usually the part where kids blurt out, oh my gosh, like a traffic light has three colors on it. I go, yes, 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 but wait, you have homework coming up. So if you say traffic light for having three colors on it and you're saying that's a pattern of three, can't pick that one. I will say that sometimes people go, oh, well, you have three bones in your ear. Inside of your ear, there's three little bones. Is that a version of culture? No, culture is something that you choose to do. So just because there are three things, like let's say there is someone who has three brothers, you have three bones in your arm. Having three brothers isn't culture. Three bones in your arm, that's not culture. Culture is something that you choose. Someone at some point chose to jam a peppermint stick into that lemon. I'm not 100% sure where they chose to do that and then use the peppermint stick as a straw, but they did it. Culture. So the four main subjects in social studies are history, archaeology, geography, and culture. Let's go ahead and move on to part two. So how do we learn about history? Well, we learn history in two main ways. We learn them from sources. Historical sources are written information that people use to understand the past. And since history involves writing, these are going to involve some kind of writing. And historical sources fall into two major categories or groups: primary sources and secondary sources. Both primary sources and secondary sources have their strengths and their weaknesses. We often just sometimes call these sources. So when someone asks you about your sources, if you bring them a piece of information, or if you say, oh, there's a thing I learned, they might ask you what your sources are. And when they're doing that, they want to know that information. What is the basis of where you're getting this fact or story or idea or concept, where is that coming from? And so we would call that a source. Let's start with primary sources, because those are, I don't want to say the most important, but primary sources are the ones that are probably like you're basing other history on. You can't really have secondary sources without a primary source. But a primary source is an eyewitness account from someone who was at that event. This could also be something like a photograph, music video, or another piece of evidence from that time, but primarily it is a first-person account of some kind of event. Examples of primary sources can include something like a diary, a documentary, an audio log, court records, things like that. Those are all examples of primary sources. I included this one over here because it is a good example of a primary source. It's a newspaper. It came out in 1964. It says President signs Civil Rights Bill. And I can see President Lyndon Baines Johnson right on there. There's a photograph of him signing the bill. The bill also is something that's in the Library of Congress, and it has a date on it. So you have all these historical components. It's written, but it's also got these other pieces of evidence attached to it. Like there's a photo on there, and there's other, like, this is a, there were audio recordings at this point. So he gives, there's video of him doing this, but you have all these little components. They're all different kinds of primary sources. Great. The second form of historical sources are secondary sources. Secondary sources are information from someone who is not at an event. This could be an account or story taken someone who saw an event and then told someone else. It might also be a collection of information gathered and then written about that event. Examples of secondary sources, well, the biggest one is most textbooks. I brought my 6th grade textbook over here. Oh boy. So, you know what? I'm actually going to cut away to the inside of the textbook where you can see all the authors. So I'm probably doing that right now. Okay, there's a whole bunch of authors. Neat. Okay, great. But all those authors in there, they were not alive to experience these events. I mean, this is ancient civilizations. It's not, it's not, oh, what happened, last Wednesday. So these are events that might have happened, 4 or 5, 6,000 years ago. So those authors of the textbook are using primary sources to sort of reconstruct the past or reconstruct information or tell us about what happened. So most textbooks are written by more than one person, and that textbook is definitely written by people that were not alive 4,000 years ago. Secondary sources also include review sites like Rotten Tomatoes or Yelp, which is a collection of reviews. So that collection of reviews forms a secondary source out of a big giant pile of primary sources. So all of those primary sources collected together of reviews of a restaurant, now you get a average star rating. So you might say, oh, this restaurant has a 4-star rating because of its collection of primary sources, and then informs you about the quality of the restaurant. And then maybe you tell your friend, oh my gosh, I read that this restaurant only has 1.5 stars. Let's not go. So secondary sources can be sort of prolific as they spread out. Okay, it's time for a wrap up. What are the 4 main fields of study in social studies? And can you name what is studied in each? Why are both kinds of sources important? Wait, could a source be incorrect? Like if I told you, hey, guess what? Not only in addition to me being a history teacher, I am also a magician, and I can make this solid pen become rubber. Oh my gosh, I made it into rubber. You heard it here, folks. Mr. Layman, also a wizard. And now, solid. And now, rubber. Oh my gosh. So can sources be incorrect? How about you explain that? You can't use my wizard example. You explain it. You tell me. So here's your homework for tonight. I'd like you to go out and find 3 examples of the pattern of 3 that we did not talk about in this class. So you can't talk about the 3 little pigs. You can't talk about Goldilocks and the 3 bears. You can't talk about the 3 billy goats gruff. And we also mentioned the traffic light thing. So you can't do traffic lights where you have green, yellow, and red. You can't do the traffic lights. Sorry. But there's plenty of patterns of 3 all around you if you're watching this in a Western culture, and you probably are because this is in English, and English speaking cultures are usually have a pattern of 3 in them. So I would like you to go out and find 3 examples of the pattern of 3 in our culture. I hope this was super helpful, and I hope you have a super awesome, cool day. Take care. Bye.